And I start there for a couple of reasons. One, that this chapter is about body composition, which most people find relatively interesting. So I try to start with something that's a little less overwhelming and is quite fun to work on. The other reason that I start here is that some of you, remember we were talking about goal setting yesterday in lab for your physical activity log. Some of you may want to set body composition type goals for your physical activity log. So just in case, we kind of start this, go in easy, and then we'll jump into the really abstract stuff next week sometime. Okay, so let me just share my screen here. How will you know if we're in this mode? So, do I need to keep it smaller? Sorry, we're just trying to work out a way that Ryan can keep an eye on the... All right, we're going to trust you guys to let us know if you suddenly can't hear me. Let's start with that and see what happens. Okay. Oh, this is so stressful. I hate technology and it's no good to me when it doesn't bloody work. All right. All right, first slide for each chapter in the PowerPoint has the learning objectives that are at the beginning of the chapter. Sometimes I delete some of the learning objectives, okay? So it's always worthwhile to compare the list on the first slide with the list at the beginning of the chapter. Some of the chapters have information that is much more in-depth than we need at this level, and so I don't want to cover that. Some of the chapters just have things that I don't feel are that useful, so every now and then, not on every chapter, but every now and then I do delete some. So if I deleted it, it almost certainly will not be on the exam. Okay. All right, so just some terminology to begin with. When we're looking at body composition, we are interested in the amount of fat tissue and the amount of non-fat tissue and the ratio of the fat to your total body mass. So non-fat tissue is everything except that fat, right? Skin, organs, bones, muscles, nervous tissue, all right? Everything else. There are some more complicated models for body composition. So if you've got really sophisticated, highly expensive equipment, you can actually break down the non-fat tissue into different types of tissues. And so you can work out how much of that total is bone mass, how much of it is muscle mass, how much of it is skin. We don't have that kind of equipment here at a little teaching university. And most of you are going to go into careers where you are working hands-on with individuals, not working in a highly sophisticated kind of lab setup. So we're going to stick with the very basic model that just splits the mass into fat mass and fat-free mass, okay? And then the ratio, which we often hear talked about in the media or from coaches, is what's my percentage body fat? So it's important to understand the difference between body composition and my mass when I stand on a scale, okay? Because mass doesn't tell me the picture, right? What I weigh doesn't tell me how healthy I am, how strong I am, how fat I am, right? It just tells me what my mass is. So that's not a very useful tool. Using just a regular old scale is pretty useless, to be honest, in our world, right? What I weigh isn't as relevant as my performance, and my performance isn't geared to what I weigh, it's geared to my composition, all right? So in the book, there's this good example. On the left, chap A weighs 90 kilos. On the right, chap B weighs 90 kilos. When they ran an underwater weighing session with them, and underwater weighing is quite good way of working out percentage body fat. The chap on the left, his underwater weight was 4 kilos. And the chap B, his underwater weight was 6 kilos. Okay? So when you put the numbers into a computer program that uses what we call the Siri equation to sort out percentage body fat, it turns out that the chap on the left has a 23% body fat, and the chap on the right only has 12% body fat, right? So he's got significantly more muscle mass versus the first man, right? Even though they weigh the same, body composition and performance would be totally different, okay? So there's lots of reasons why body composition is an important topic to spend a bit of time on. If I'm coaching a competitive team, then understanding body composition helps me help my team members set appropriate goals, like we spoke about yesterday, okay? It also helps me to understand what my training regime is doing to their bodies a little bit better, right? But it's not just competitive athletes. And as movement people, we're not all going to work with competitive athletes, right? We're going to work with all kinds of people. And we've got a really big problem going on in the West, and particularly in the States, with obesity and health-related issues, right? So now obesity is considered an epidemic, and it's not going to go away anytime soon. It's getting worse before it gets better, if it gets better. And not only that, but it's across all different kinds of populations, and not just adults. We're seeing obese children as well. Right? If we use BMI, and we'll talk a little bit more about BMI, BMI is not a great way to determine whether someone is overweight or not, okay? Because the only way we calculate BMI is the height of someone over their weight, right? And we just said weight is a non-starter, it doesn't tell me anything, all right? So when we see BMI as a reference number to a population, you have to remember that BMI is an indicator of health risk, not a definitive label of being overweight or obese, right? Because athletes very often come out as overweight or obese on a BMI chart because of their amount of muscle mass. Okay? So 25 to 29.9 BMI is considered in the overweight category. You have to eyeball the person. If they've got shoulders like this and hips like this and great big muscly thighs, that number is not telling me they're overweight. Okay? Obese is BMI equal to or greater than 30. Okay. So in the US, and these numbers are a little bit out of date, so it wouldn't surprise me if that had gone up a little bit. But just under 500,000 people a year die from health risks and diseases that are linked to being obese. Somewhere around 70% of adults in the States are either overweight or obese, and they estimate around 35% are obese. And I'll show you why I think these numbers may be higher than this now, because I've pulled up the most recent obesity trend map from the CDC to show you. What we do know is that the prevalence of obesity is rapidly increasing. You have to be a little bit careful when you look at the Department of Health statistics within the states. So for example, one of the things that will happen is they'll say, okay, 2 years ago, our overweight obesity statistic was 27%, right? And now our overweight obesity statistic is 27%. Yay, we're doing a really, really good job of controlling this, right? But they give you the overall statistic, and what they don't tell you is that if you dive into that number, actually what happened was that 2 years ago, that 27% was made up of more overweight people and less obese people, and that now the same 27% has a far greater ratio of obese people under it and less overweight people. All right? So I'm relatively cynical when I'm looking at numbers. I like to dive in and tease them out because it benefits the states to skew the numbers a little bit. They don't lie, right? The 27% now wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth, okay? So, given that we have this scary rate of overweight and obesity, it's concerning then that so many people spend their time trying to lose weight, right? They spend their time, they spend their money, resources that could be used doing something else, trying to lose weight, typically unsuccessfully, okay? So, these are the maps up to 2010, and then I have a new one to show you, okay? 1995, you can see here, the blue states had obesity prevalence of 10 to 14% amongst their adults, and the dark sort of orangey states had 15 to 19% prevalence. And then we get to 2000, and things are changing. Only Colorado, out of all the states, still had, just 5 years later, still had obesity prevalence of 10 to 14%. No one else, right? And we have a new category by 2000. The green category is prevalence of 20 to 24% obese adults in the state. 5 years later, the picture is even worse. Colorado is still the least obese state in the country, but they're now up to 15 to 19%, right? And you can see the green has spread across to what was orange, and now we have a new red category that is 25 to 29%, and in 2 states, we have more than 30% of the adult population as obese. Just 10 years on from what was a relatively healthy picture. Okay? So at this point, everybody was starting to panic. And the National Institutes for Health and the Department for Health and all these kind of corporations and different NGOs and governmental bodies got together and said, what the heck can we do? We have to do something. Like, this is getting a bit silly, really, you know. And so they came up with a document that was called Healthy People 2010, and it set some goals to decrease obesity by the year 2010. Unfortunately, as you can see by the next map, that didn't work out so well, right? And actually, not one state met all the obesity goals for 2010. Not one. Okay? So, this is a problem. And so what happened then was, okay, we reviewed the 2010 data, and now we create Healthy People 2020, and we have new goals for the states to try to meet for 2020. To my knowledge, that data isn't available yet, okay? Cannot wait to see it. Currently in New Mexico, about 30% of kindergartners and 8th graders are obese and overweight. 30% of 5 to 6-year-olds are overweight or obese in this state, right? How can they possibly get healthy from that? Right? This is an uphill battle, and they're only 5 and 6. So this is why it's important that we understand what's going on, that we keep up to date with the trends, that we know the scientific way to tackle overweight, and we understand movement skills, and we understand the interaction between movement skills and body composition, so that we can go out there, not me, because I'm in the classroom, but you guys, right? You're going to go out there and you're going to be the front line trying to impact people's health and wellness for their life, right? So let me pull up the next map, which is even scarier. Stop sharing this one and start sharing this one. Oh, why didn't that come up? Oh, there it is. Okay. So, this is the 2018 map. Colorado and Hawaii and Washington, D.C. are the three least fact places to be. They are at 20 to 25% prevalence for adults. Okay. What do those three places have in common? What does DC, Colorado, and Hawaii have in common? Go on. Have a go. Give me an answer. Natalie. They can't hear me. Can you hear me? Yes. Yeah. Anybody going to have a go? So they're all pretty wealthy, right? Hawaii and Colorado have a great environment for being active, being outdoors. Right? DC, not so much, but tons of money in DC. Huge poor population as well, but it's kind of masked by all these rich people there. Right? Then we've got half the country are at 25 to 30%. Another half of the other half. I can't do maths either. Half plus half. This can't be a half, can it? So the dark orange is 30 to 35% prevalence, and now the dark red is greater than 35% prevalence of adult obesity. And we have what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 states. It's a huge problem. So, it's easy, I think, when we are relatively in shape or very in shape if you're still competing, right? And we have been physically active all our lives and we enjoy moving and we can't imagine not moving, right? Even when the initial lockdown was on earlier in the year, I don't know about you, but I was doing, I was exercising in the house until they said, oh no, it's okay, you can go outside and exercise, right? Because not moving isn't an option, okay? But you as a population are a tiny, tiny, tiny percent of the adult population in this country because you enjoy moving. Most people don't move, okay? So the reason this body composition, this obesity and overweight is a problem or a concern is because of the association with disease, okay? So here's a list of some of the diseases that are associated with being obese. A couple of them, like type 2 diabetes, hypertension, certain arthritis. You could even link with just being really overweight, you know. And there's a difference between being a little bit chubby and being really overweight or obese. Okay? But there's no simple answer to why people become obese. All right? Again, when you're in our shoes, it's very easy to go, well, duh, it's just, you know, they eat too much or they're lazy, right? Well, that does play a role. It's not necessarily, I would argue that for most people who are very overweight or obese, the choice not to move is not to do with being lazy. All right, those of you that took motor behavior with me, which probably isn't very many of you in this class because I didn't teach it last year, but once you're overweight, once you're obese, once you're carrying that amount of garbage around with you, it becomes very, very, very difficult to move, right? So it's not that I'm lazy, it's that I can't move, okay? I can't breathe when I try to move. I actually can't, like, you can walk behind people in Walmart, and if there was snow or sand on the ground, their footprints would be like this, right? Because their legs are so huge that they can't actually walk normally, so they walk like a toddler, right? This is a toddler's walking action, not an adult's, right? Adults don't walk like this. So, I would like to challenge you to start rephrasing the lazy in your head, right? And they eat too much. That is often true, right? They eat a lot of food. Not all of them, though. And so when the researchers are looking at this problem, not all people who are obese eat a lot of food. So there has to be other issues going on. So it's a huge area of research right now to try to get to the bottom of the variables and factors that play into an individual becoming obese. All right? So for example, for some people, that the research has shown that they don't produce enough or possibly any leptin. Leptin is involved in the breakdown of stored fat tissue. So if I don't produce leptin, I can't break down stored fat, right? We see alterations in appetite control for some of these people. So then it becomes difficult to tackle because they're not, they don't feel satiated. So there's like a chemical change in their brain. So for you and I, right, when we eat a lot of food, we feel full up. Sometimes if we eat a lot of food too quickly, we feel more than full up, right? And we get Buddha belly and you're lying on the couch going, oh my God, I ate too much, right? But we feel full up. So what happens with some people is they don't ever get that feeling of satiation. They don't get full up. They're physically full up, like their stomach might be full, but the nervous signal from the stretch receptors in the stomach wall to the brain, that the brain interprets as, oh, I'm full up, stop eating. It doesn't interpret them like that anymore, right? Physical inactivity, yes. But as I said, once you're in this situation, how easy is it to become physically active enough to help your health? Right? Just try next time you go to the supermarket, right? Go to the vegetables, find the biggest bag of potatoes you can find, pick it up and carry it with you around. Don't put it in the trolley, that's cheating, right? Carry it around Walmart with you while you do your shopping and see what that feels like. And these people aren't talking about a 20, 40, 50 pound bag of potatoes. They're talking maybe 150, 200, 300 pounds of additional weight that they're trying to move. Okay? And then we have some cultural factors which are very, very difficult to alter, right? If I come from a culture where food is used to not just nourish me, but to soothe me, to placate me, to make me feel safe, that's a difficult picture to break, right? If I come from a culture where my grandmother spends 3 days cooking this amazing meal and it was all deep fried, you don't go to grandma's and not eat the deep fried food, right? So we've got some, as I say, some additional problems. In the States as well, we have these large portion sizes and these buffet setups which just encourage people. You know, you go into a buffet, you pay your $5, you can eat all you like, right? Well, so I go and I have some broccoli and a piece of chicken and some Jello and I sit down and I eat, I leave? No, hell, I paid $5 for all I can eat. I go back 5 times, right? And I keep eating, even though I didn't need it, but I paid for it, right? And if you go to Pizza Hut, right, a medium pizza in the States is as big, if not bigger, than a large pizza from Pizza Hut in London. The one in London costs 3 times more, but it's smaller, right? So portion control is non-existent right now, right? It's down to the individual to control their portion size because the corporations who are selling it to you aren't going to do it for you. Okay? So all of these factors and more play into this problem of obesity, right? It's highly complicated. Oh, McDoo-doos. Don't eat McDoo-doos. Even the salads aren't low fat, right? If you get a large size meal, that's enough calories for one person for an entire day. If they're not if you're an NFL football player, right? That's slightly different. But, you know, if I go and I get a double cheeseburger and a large fries and a large Coke and an apple pie, that's almost 2,000 calories, right? So if I'm a relatively inactive individual, 2,000 calories is all I need for a whole day, not just for a snack meal or for dinner. So I'm not saying don't go to McDonald's. You're not allowed to bring McDonald's into my classroom. I won't let you go that far. But if you go, right, make it a treat, and make it B, knowledgeable. Check the ingredients, check the calories, check, because it's okay to eat, right? I'm not giving up my ice cream or my wine. That's a lot of wasted calories. But you have to balance it, okay? So Can I go to McDonald's? Yeah. Can I go to McDonald's every day for breakfast or for dinner or for lunch? No. So in 2013, so what's that now? We're 7 years out from the American Medical Association declaring obesity to be a disease. So it used to be, before 2013, obesity was categorized as a condition. Right? 2013, the AMA changed the category to a disease. Now that's an interesting point of law in a way, because what happens then is once it's a disease, it's now your doctor's responsibility to treat it, right? So if I go and get my annual checkup and I'm obese, they're legally responsible now to A, tell me, B, explain it to me, C, give me some kind of strategy to manage it, right? So that's quite an interesting change just by that legal change in the category. The research on diets and things like this is very equivocal. One of the problems that we see with people who are obese is if they go on very, very low calorie diets, they lose weight. But when you look at the research, very few people who lost weight using a very low calorie diet keep that weight off, because a very low calorie diet is not maintainable. Right? It's not a good way to lose weight. It's not healthy, it's not maintainable, you hate yourself and your food and your life, and then when you've lost the weight, you go back to some less useful strategies, right? So, as I said, it's a highly complicated picture when we're looking at this, okay? One of the things we need to understand is the difference between what we call subcutaneous fat, which is the fat that sits under your skin that you can pinch at, right? Particularly here. Okay? And the fat that is inside in your trunk around your organs, which is called visceral fat. And that distinction is important because visceral fat has been much more tightly linked to disease development. So coronary artery disease, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, strokes, much more linked to this visceral fat than subcutaneous fat. Okay. When we look at males versus females, developing visceral fat is more typically male, okay? So we get this picture, this kind of apple-shaped picture, all right? Doesn't mean that there aren't females who develop this. My sister is a classic apple, long skinny legs, you hit her hips, boom, and then you hit her shoulders, right? So she's classic, but it's typically more male than female. The subcutaneous fat, in particular, lays itself around the butt and the thighs and the upper arms. Much more a female picture. Again, not that men don't develop what we call the pear shape, right? Some men do develop pear shape, not apple shape. But the majority of females are going to develop pear shape if they put on fat mass, and more men are going to develop this visceral apple shape, all right? Which is why we see a higher rate of coronary artery diseases and heart attacks and things like that in the male population than the female population. So let's take it back to performance for a moment, all right? Let's look at the link between body composition and performance. So if I have the same fat-free mass as another individual on my team, but I have a higher fat percentage than that individual, it's likely that I'm going to be slower and not jump as high. Not always, because it's not the only factor involved in running fast and jumping high, right? But it's likely, okay? Also, the more fat mass I have, fat doesn't use oxygen, and so more fat mass means less maximum oxygen capacity. So particularly if I'm an aerobic athlete, my aerobic capacity will be lower when I carry more fat mass and less muscle mass. Absolute strength events like lifting and things like that, the more fat-free mass, particularly if it's muscle, the better off I'm going to perform. That one's a little more obvious, all right? So the correlation then between what I'm made up of and what I'm able to do as in my activity, the performance I'm able to achieve, depends on what my body composition is like, what the motor task that I'm trying to perform is. So if I have to be up in the air, so I'm a runner, a jumper, right, then that's impacted much more than if I'm a sumo wrestler, right, and I never leave the floor, okay? If I have to get my body mass up in the air against gravity, I want less fat mass, right? Don't forget though, and we'll talk about this as we go through, there are many other factors, right? Muscle type is a big factor. Oxygen capacity is a big factor, right? So it's not just fat mass that impacts performance. But given two individuals where all else is equal, the one with greater fat mass is more likely to have the lower performance. So when you're going through this, I want you to pay some attention to table 12.1. That table has some outcomes, some results from bench press testing and sprint testing amongst different athletes. So you can have a look at, you know, if I'm a sprinter, what's my muscle and fat ratio versus if I'm a really good bench presser, right? It's just an interesting comparison to look at and to give you, you know, actual data that supports the idea of more muscle or less fat increases performance. Depends on what the performance is. Think about different sports, okay? So if I'm going to be a linebacker, I want to be as big as possible, right? Now, unfortunately, that has led to misuse of steroids and other banned drugs at high school level, for example, right? Because they want to be as big as possible, okay? But that may make me a world-class linebacker, but I'm not going to win the Boston Marathon or the Olympic gold medal at a 10,000 meter. Right? It's a totally different body type, totally different composition. So one of the things, if I go back to yesterday to the lab, one of the things about understanding body composition, understanding how to test for certain abilities and things like that, is to help people set great goals, right? Because if I'm slow as all get out, there's no point in me wanting to run 100 meters for my college. Right? I can't change that. It doesn't matter how fast I want to be or how hard I work. I'm slow. Right? Same with body composition. If I understand what my body composition is and therefore what my potentials are, I maybe take a different route where I can be more successful. Remember that composition and size, go back to the picture of the two men in the underwater weighing, right? Composition and size and mass are not the same thing. So changing body composition. So one of the other measures you can use, if you don't have access to working out what someone's percentage fat is a waist to hip ratio. Right? Waist to hip ratio is useful because if we think back to the visceral fat idea, if my waist is bigger than my hips, that would be an indicator for health risk, right? So for men, a waist to hip ratio greater than 0.95 indicates greater health risk for cardiovascular disease and sudden death. For women, it's about 0.8, so it's a bit lower for women. If we can measure body fat percentage, that makes life a little bit easier, I think, because we have quite a lot of data that links body fat percentage with certain health problems. Okay. So quickly, we'll come back, we'll start here again Monday. Monday? Yeah, it's Friday. But I want you to think about this idea. All right? It's not only overweight that is unhealthy. Being underweight is unhealthy as well. Okay? So if I look at the first column in this table, this number represents the minimum amount of fat a male or a female needs to function healthily, right? So somewhere around 3 to 5% for men, although 3%, I've known a couple of long distance runners down at 3%, and that is very, very, very thin. Right? 12 to 14% for women, which when I first learned this, I was like, oh, that's interesting, because when I was in college, I remember a lot of women trying to be like 8 or 10%, particularly if they were endurance athletes, right? Again, that's underweight. Minimum for a female is 12%, right? Lean athletes. So lean male athletes are usually somewhere between 6 to 13%. Lean female athletes between 16 to 20%. Healthy adults who are not athletes but they're healthy, for males 14 to 17, for females 21 to 24, and then unhealthy 18 to 25% for men, 25 to 31 for women, and anything higher than that would put you into an obese category, which is really unhealthy, right, as opposed to overweight and unhealthy. Okay, so we'll come back and pick up from there on Monday. Have a look at your textbook, look at the key points and highlights and little boxes of information and things. You know, try to take the time to, you know, even if it's just 20 minutes, half an hour, to read around a little bit what we've done today and start to absorb that information a bit. And then if you've got questions, does anybody have any questions right now? Well, I really hope you are able to hear me for the whole class, because I'm getting a bit tired of the microphone cutting out. And if you have any questions over the weekend, you know how to reach me. Otherwise, I will see you on Monday. Okay, bye.